Okay, we'll try it again. I don't know what happened. We had some technical difficulties. Anyway, this is a completely true story, which I'm going to tell you now for the second time because we lost you the first time. And it started when a guy named Mark Busanich, who's one of our VJ trainees, he's came to the boot camp in New York. He is a member of the VJ.com. He emailed me and said, I want to talk to you about my career. He was an employee for many years. He worked, he got his phone and his video, and he tried to make a career. And he said to me, how do you do all this stuff? How do you get started? And the best advice I gave him is what I've done for years is I just pretty much take every opportunity I can. I write 100 letters a month, which is only 3 letters a day, and I go to as many people as I can. And the fact here is you never know what's going to lead to what, which is the point of the story I'm about to tell you. Anyway, when I started New York One, which is, God knows, 10 million years ago, actually 1990, I think, we were the first VJ-driven station in New York, in the United States certainly, and we were using these little Sony cameras for broadcast. Sony found this very exciting. They found it so exciting that I got an invitation from Mr. Idei, who was then the chairman and CEO of the Sony Corporation in Tokyo, to come to Japan, and he sent me around Japan on this speaking tour, and I'd go and give these talks, these room full of Japanese people who probably didn't know what I was talking about, and mostly I talked about Gutenberg and the video revolution, and at the end I would get an envelope full of $10,000 in cash as a thank you. It was a fantastic trip, believe me. Anyway, I came back to New York after the trip, and the trip was all over, and I hadn't really thought about it except for what I was going to do with the money. And I got a call one day from a guy named Jeff Sagansky. And Sagansky was then the chairman and CEO and the head of Sony TriStar. That's Sony's movie studio in Hollywood. I didn't know anything about movie studios, and I didn't know anything about Jeff Sagansky, and I didn't know anything about making movies, but I was doing like news. And so Sagansky said, I just met with Mr. Idei in Tokyo, and he told me all about you. And I don't do nonfiction, but if you ever have an idea for fiction, call me up. And he hung up the phone. Well, I didn't have any ideas for nonfiction. I only did news, and so I thought that was kind of interesting. So I went home to my current ex-wife, then my wife, now a nightmare I don't want to deal with anymore. But anyway, I told her that, this funny thing happened in the office today. This guy Sagansky, who's the director of Sony TriStar Hollywood Pictures, called me up and said, if you have any ideas for fiction, call me. I said, I don't have any ideas for fiction. She said, what are you, a moron? The head of a Hollywood studio calls you up and says, do you have any ideas? Send him some ideas. So I thought, all right, anything opportunity. So I sat down and I wrote up 3 ideas, 3 stupid little ideas, and I sent them off. I mean, it was no more than like 2 sentences each one, and I sent them off to him because at least I wanted to be responsive to, his request, even though I did news. I was a journalist. I wasn't a Hollywood filmmaker. Anyway, so, about a week later, Sagansky calls me up and he said, I got your ideas and I really like one of them. This number 2 idea, I like this. Why don't you expand on it? It was a story I made up about time travel, which I can tell you the thing if you're really interested. And so I said, okay, so I took the 3 sentences and I made them into a page. This story about time travelers who go through time and change history by moving little things, right, to try and make life better for people. So I made it into a page. And then I sent the page to Sagansky, and then he wrote back to me and he said, this is pretty good, why don't you expand on this? So 1 page became 5 pages, became 10 pages, became 20 pages. Finally, it was down to 50 pages. I had written a 50-page treatment of this story that I made up one day. And it was, I tell you briefly what it was, that this guy was, he belonged to this organization I called Prime Directive, which I stole from Star Trek, and probably we'd have to change that. And their job, unlike on Star Trek, was that they were supposed to go through time, through this time machine, and go back in time and make little tiny minimal changes that nobody would notice so that the whole of humanity, lived a better life. For example, they blew up the Hindenburg so that people would develop airplanes, stuff like that. And so in the story that I'd written, this time traveler who belongs to this organization goes back in time to stop the Kennedy assassination. and he goes to Lee Harvey Oswald's house the night before the assassination, and he takes the rifle and he changed the sight on it so the sight is slightly off, and Oswald will miss. But through a whole thing, it turns out they have to kill Kennedy, because if they don't, there's going to be a nuclear war. So at the last minute, these other time travelers come and they appear on the grassy knoll, and they take the guns and they kill Kennedy. And that was pretty much the essence. So that was not a bad story. I mean, it had good characters and stuff like that. Anyway, so Sagansky says, after he gets the 50-page treatment, he says, I really like this. Let's hire a writer. At which point I should have said, great, let's hire a Hollywood writer who knows what they're doing. But stupidly, I said, I can write the screenplay. This is the combination of ignorance and arrogance, which is a terrible combination. So he said, have you ever written a screenplay before? And I said, no, but how hard could it be? Idiot. So he says, okay, you write the screenplay, I'll give you notes. So I bought one of these little, books, how to write a screenplay. And, guys out here on Fifth Avenue, they sell screenplays themselves, and you can read them and see what they're like. And so, I sat down and I bought the software, whatever it was called, Final Cut or End Cut or whatever the thing was called. And so then I started to write the screenplay. And I wrote the screenplay, and of course, I'm sure it was terrible. And I sent it off to Sagansky, and he called me up and he said, I'm going to be in New York next week. Let's meet and we'll go through this. So the guy, for 3 hours at his townhouse over in the East 80s, I sat in the kitchen and he went through my whole screenplay. Do this, don't do this, do this, do this, do this. And I followed those notes, and then I did another version. And then I sent it to him, and he said, come out to LA, I want to go over the screenplay with you. So I went out to LA. This went on for almost a year. New York, LA, London, wherever we happened to get together, the guy, fantastic guy, he spent hours and hours going through the screenplay with me. And finally, we had the finished screenplay for Prime Directive, or whatever it was going to be called. And I thought, great. And then he called me up and he said, I love this, I'm going to greenlight it. So this was fantastic. So I went home to my nasty ex-wife, the witch, and I said, guess what? We're going to make a movie, because we got Prime Directive has been greenlit. Fantastic, great, whatever, I go to Hollywood. And then 3 or 4 days later, she calls me up and she says, she's a nasty person. She said, you better look at page 6 of the New York Post. So I looked at page 6, and this thing said, Jeff Sagansky out at Sony TriStar. So eventually, my screenplay was what is called orphaned, and it never got made, and to this day I still have it. And if you want to produce a great film, I got the screenplay. But the point of the story is that even though I never made the movie, which is definitely unfortunate, what I did was I learned how to tell a story. And I learned how to tell a story from the best in the business, which is a guy who ran a Hollywood studio for years and understood storytelling and scripts. Well, storytelling in fictional movies like Prime Directive or, Black Panther or any movie you want to see, it's all basically the same, and that's what Sagansky taught me. He taught me to understand the nature of the structure and the architecture of telling a great story, how to get the audience's attention from the beginning, how to develop the character, how to make the tentpole, the arc of the story, how to build towards the end of the story, how to have people wait for a conclusion, how to create an arc of stories so they stay with us, how to generate engagement with people. And so even though I never got to make Prime Directive, those are the lessons that I applied rigorously to all the videos and all the TV shows that we made, and also to all the people that I taught and continue to teach how to do this. When we run these VJ courses, or, if you read my book, iPhone Millionaire, or, if you take the online thing in the VJ.com, you'll see that we spend about 5% of the time with the button pushing. In all honesty, you can learn how to push the buttons on YouTube. You don't really need. What we are really focused on is telling people how to create a compelling story that people want to see. And so these lessons that I got from Sagansky, find the characters, create the characters, develop the characters, create an arc of story, have a peak, entice them in the beginning, tease them to what's coming, create a reason to stay until the end, how to create dialogue, how to create a dialogue not just with characters, how to create dialogue with the audience. These are all the really important lessons that I took away from my experience of screenplay school with the best in the business. And the rules of Hollywood are the rules that I always try to apply to the news and documentaries and nonfiction stuff that we and all of our students and graduates produce all the time. There's no difference in terms of great storytelling between a Hollywood script and a news story. I mean, there shouldn't be. The problem with news stories is you get some schmuck standing there with the microphone going, blah, 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 here we are. You get the B-roll, the police tape, you slap some stuff down, you get some deadly interviews, and you're done. And it's no wonder that local news is absolutely dying or dead. And there's no reason for it. There's no excuse for it. Every rule that we learned from Hollywood screenwriting and Hollywood storytelling you can apply to news and journalism and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to cram information and facts down your throat. I mean, most documentaries, in all honesty, absolutely unwatchable crap because they're just blathering talking heads and narrative with B-roll smacked on top of them. They don't follow the basic rules of great storytelling. So, okay, I didn't get to make the story, I didn't get to make the movie, but which is a tragedy, believe me. But what I did do was, well, maybe I would still be married, so that would have been an equal tragedy. But at least married to you know who. So that would have been a tragedy. But things all worked out for the best. But what I did learn, and the lessons that I've tried to pass on, is how to apply great Hollywood storytelling to nonfiction and documentaries. And you can do it, and so can anybody else. So, you know, I always say check out thevj.com and certainly sign up for our upcoming June New York Video Boot Camp, where you'll learn that and a whole lot more, as the tagline goes. Or just email me, and I'm always happy to give my advice and screen your stuff and generally rip it to shreds. So I'm sticking around Facebook if you have any questions, and thanks for tuning in. See you later.